Hi friends, I'm Lila Little to be exact. I'm here to share stories about us rabbits, stories you want to hear about, stories that you need to know. These stories are from a book our human wrote called Rabbittails, The Adventures of Lila and Bandit. Us rabbits helped write the book. Rabbittails is not a book that you humans read in a regular book format. This is a book in motion. Did you know that the coolest people can understand lagomorph language? That is a language us rabbits speak. Our human always says that rabbits speak to those who listen. Before I share today's story, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. With that, let's get into today's episode of Rabbit Tales. For those who did not read our first book, Bunny Conversations, The Entertaining Dialogue of Pet Rabbits, it might be helpful for me to start with a very brief introduction of myself and also my bonded partners. In early 2016, I was born to a litter of Holland lop rabbits. My siblings all got sick. Even with the help of the white coats, I was the only one who survived. Understandably, I was missing my litter mates, who had all hopped over the Rainbow Bridge. Fortunately, I met Bandit, and I was paired up with him immediately after the tragedy happened. Bandit and I were both very tiny kits. We formed a strong bond and were looking for a good home. That's when we met janabrock, our human. We adored Jana and decided to adopt her immediately. Since that time, we have all worked together to share information about best care practices for pet rabbit ownership. Bandit and I became known as the Littles. As time passed, more rabbits in need would come to live at our house. One of those rabbits was named Roland Thumper Tiny to be precise. Roland bonded with Bandit and I almost immediately, so we decided to adopt him too. Roland is small. He's a dwarf-sized rabbit, just like Bandit and I. Technically, he's now part of us, also one of the Littles. But for the longest time, we called Roland our +1. Now today I want to share a story about a time before Roland Thumper Tiny moved in with us. Back then, before Roland came, Bandit and I had a lot to do. We still have busy schedules now, especially with all the work we do in the studio with our human. But back before Roland came to live with us, Bandit and I were carrying a very big load, and we didn't have other rabbits around to help us. The humans had rabbits before me and Bandit came, but those bunnies had all gotten old and crossed over the Rainbow Bridge too. Bandit and I were rushing around helping as much as we could in the Love Your Rabbit studios, plus we were helping our human write a book. Even with all that going on, Bandit always made time to practice his rabbit karate skills. He wanted to become a karate master. That was one of his big goals. He considered himself the protector of all who lived in our house, including the human. He felt very responsible for us. When Bandit was not practicing karate, he spent his spare time in the yard searching for raisin trees and hunting for baked treats. He was convinced that somewhere in that big yard, the human had a bush full of baked goods. He was certain that before each night at treat time, the human would go out into the yard and handpick baked rabbit treats from the plants that grew out there. And he was determined to find out exactly which bush those baked treats were coming from. One day, Bandit and I were out in the yard with our human who was trimming some plants. The house rule has always been, if bunnies are out in the yard, then human is outside too. That is the way it works here. No rabbit is ever in the yard without her being present. Bandit says it's because the human is afraid to be in the house without him in there to protect her. So when we go outdoors, she comes with us. Otherwise, how would she survive if the threat were present? Anyway, by this time, Bandit and I had become aware of clowns. Before adopting our human, we knew nothing about house clowns, mirror clowns, door clowns, refrigerator clowns, and the worst of all threats, the yard clowns. To be clear, I never saw these clowns, but Bandit, he saw them everywhere. He once went up to a mirror and saw a clown staring right back at him. He swears that clown looked exactly like him. He had a black and white fur coat just like Bandit, and he was small. Every single time Bandit went up to that mirror, that clown would show up. Bandit even tried lunging at the mirror to try to scare that clown away, but that mirror clown lunged right back, and it ended up with a bump on his nose. Terrifying situation. Bandit had often told me that clowns were dangerous and that we must always be on the lookout for them. But not to worry, because his karate skills had become superior. Bandit was certain he could protect me from any threat, including predator birds, neighborhood cats, dogs, and of course, the worst predator of all, the yard clowns. As I was hopping and binking across the yard, Bandit told me to take shelter immediately. He had been hopping by the steel barbecuer that the human had on the deck near the yard. As he passed, Bandit glanced over at the shiny surface of the barbecue and boom, there it was staring right back at him. Of course, those types of barbecuers have a shiny mirror-type surface on the outside, almost like the mirrors in the house. Bandit was absolutely certain that he had seen a yard clown, and it just happened to look exactly like the one in the house that he had seen so many times in the mirror. Bandit knew this yard clown had some kind of superpower to be able to do what the mirror clown had done in the house, because they could both mimic Bandit's appearance. According to Bandit, the human was also on high alert because of the yard clowns. I did not see any clowns in the yard, nor did I see the human acting fearful, but Bandit was insistent that danger was afoot, and we had to take cover for our own protection. I followed Bandit across the yard and did as he said. We hid in one of the outdoor bunny houses. Those bunny houses were our safe zones, places to run to in case any threat is present. And that is just what we did. We ran to safety. Now inside of the top part of the bunny house, Bandit and I were perfectly still so as not to attract any attention whatsoever. I glanced at Bandit, who put his paw up to his mouth and said, "Shh." He was listening to make sure he couldn't hear any clown footsteps coming toward us. Meanwhile, I started scanning the yard, looking for any clue that we might be in danger. I looked over at our human. She didn't seem concerned at all. I looked and I looked back and forth across the yard within my view, and I saw no danger. I told Bandit in a soft, quiet voice that perhaps he was imagining the clowns because I didn't see anything when I looked out in the yard. I didn't see any clowns, I didn't see any predator threats, not on the deck, not near the barbecuer, or even near the human. I saw no threat whatsoever. Hearing this, Bandit thumped his paw and replied, "No, Lila, I did not imagine that yard clown. I don't know why you didn't see it, but nonetheless, it is my job to protect you and to protect our human. You know as well as I do that humans often don't sense danger until it's too late, but us rabbits, we know." "I just don't understand why I never see these clowns," I said. "I'm a rabbit too. You'd think I would sense the danger." Bandit just shook his head and replied, "The clown threat is very real, Lila. I am telling you as sure as anything, I saw a yard clown. He was dangerous. Anybody who saw what I saw would say the exact same thing. Just be thankful I'm here to protect you and to protect our human." As I had so many times before, I sighed heavily and just said, "Okay, I understand. Do you think we're safe to go back in the yard now?" Bandit made a point of sticking his head outside of the rabbit house. He looked in one direction, all across the yard, and then swung his head around and looked in the other direction. Then he looked at me and said, "Lila, stay put." He told me he would do a sweep of the area and he would let me know when it was safe to come out. As Bandit cautiously went down the ramp that emptied him onto the lawn, I continued scanning, just in case something was out there, some kind of clown threat that I had not seen previously. Bandit searched and searched the yard. Back and forth he ran, looking behind every nook and cranny, every bush, behind every tree, before shouting back at me, "It's all clear, Lila. You can come out now." So I carefully walked down the ramp and started running through the yard again. I wanted to get my exercise in. After all, it was almost time for our 8th nap of the day. As I was running, I heard the human say, "Bandit, you know you're not allowed in the vegetable garden without my permission." Bandit was caught again. He was always trying to sneak a carrot top from the garden when human wasn't looking. Our human did not like us in the garden because she was afraid we would eat too much of something and it would upset our stomachs. I respected her requests and I always stayed away. But Bandit, he was a bit more mischievous. "Humph," Bandit said loudly. Sulking, he approached the human and looked up at her. He then went into a meerkat stance, standing on his hind paws with his front paws up in the air. That always convinced human to give him whatever he wanted. I headed over to where they were because I knew that Bandit was about to get a carrot top treat. I didn't want to miss that. Human said. "Okay, Bandit, I'll give you and Lila a few carrot tops before your nap, but it is not treat time, so you can't have very much." Human walked over to the garden. We were right on her heels. She snapped the tops off of a few carrots that were growing there and handed some to each of us. We gobbled them up as quickly as we could. We rarely got to eat the orange part of the carrots because human knew that too many carrots were not good for rabbits, but we also knew that she grew those carrots just so we could eat the green tops. Human turned and started heading toward the house. Bandit and I both headed into the living room, flopped onto the floor, and fell fast asleep.